Let's take a look now at how I built this app. I want to start first by kind of looking at the modules, and then we'll kind of open up each one and see what the purpose of each one is. As I mentioned, I have three modules in the application: App, Core, and Data Dragon. And I want to talk about the intent of each one of these. I've intentionally separated them into folders so that the code is separate, but also the intent of each module is separate. So inside the app folder is what I'll call the application module. This is what makes up the app. This is the app delegate and the views that you see and the tasks that you see, and I'll talk about the module here in a second. But obviously every Objective-C application has an app delegate, and that's where this resides, in the app module. Inside the view folder obviously is where all my view components are. So I have a couple of collection views. If you remember the first screen with the champions scrolling, the list of champions that I showed you in another video, that's a collection view. And also when you tap on a champion and display the skins for the champion, that also is a collection view, and I have some custom cell components. I keep all my nib files in a subfolder of view in their own folder. Task is one thing, architectural component of most every application I build, is that I like to employ the command pattern. The command pattern at a very high level is, if you were to take your application and describe everything that it does and identify all the verbs, and in this case I may query, I may insert, I may delete, I may update data, those are all verbs, and I have a command for each verb and each subject. So this is a generic query task, and I'll get into this in way more detail in another video, but the tasks are how I implement the command pattern. The last thing I'll talk about here in the app module is the module folder, and this is essentially the definition of the module. I also like to use a dependency injector, and I'll talk more about this in another video as well. But in the module folder of each application module is the dependency injection definition for that module. So let's look at core. The purpose of core really is, think of this as a bunch of generic base classes that have nothing to do really specifically with this application, and conceptually I could really take this core module out of here and make it a different library that I just reference and import as a CocoaPod or something else. There's nothing application specific about LoL Book of Champions in here. There's just a lot of base classes and protocols. So inside the content folder, for example, I have some base components that I could use in most any app that employs the same architecture. I have a content provider, a base class. I have a content provider factory, a content observer, content provider, blah, blah, blah. All kinds of things here that may seem confusing at first, but in other videos I'm going to deep dive into all of this so that you'll understand what it is. Database, of course, every iOS device comes with SQLite, which is a database that's part of the operating system. And this application uses SQLite to store data. And these are some classes that are generic classes having to do with the database. Again, the module is the dependency injection definition, and also some base module classes that I reference elsewhere. Finally, I have some base tasks here and some protocols here as well that I reference elsewhere. So this core module really is a piece of technology that I would like to use in a lot of apps that I write. They all would probably share this architecture, and they would have modules that reference classes in this core module. Data Dragon is where all of the logic having to do with consuming data from the Riot Games Developer API and inserting it into my database. There are no views in this module. This is all service and background work. So in the content folder, I have some classes that are knowledgeable about the content that I'm providing to the application up here and that I'm consuming from the Riot Games API. So I'm not going to go any further into that. Again, same thing here. I have dependency injection definitions for this module, and then I have a service. I have two types of services. A local service, which is a sync service. Think about the fact that I have all this data that I want to store locally, and I also have data remotely that I can access in the API. And there's a sync operation. Every time the application starts, I need to go out and check the remote service to see what the latest version of Data Dragon is, which contains all the champion data that I'm displaying in this application. And if it differs from my local version in my local database for this application, then I want to sync that data. I want to go get all the data from the API, bring it into my application stored locally in the database. That's what this does. This remote folder contains AF networking classes that make network requests to either retrieve images from the CDN or make LoL API requests against the developer Riot Games API. And finally, I have all sorts of tasks, commands that make up this module. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a number of things that the application needs to call upon. I need to be able to cache champion images locally. I need to be able to clear all my local Data Dragon data. I need to get all the static data from the remote API. I need to go get the realm, insert a champion, insert a realm, and then I have a bunch of internal tasks as well that operate on the database, and these are internal to this module. So I can delete a champion skin, delete a realm, insert a champion skin, insert a realm, etc. So basically, as I mentioned earlier, these are all the verbs. They're internal. That means they're internal to this module, and they should not be referenced outside of the module. The other tasks, however, these are public tasks, and they can be referenced from the app module. We'll take a deep dive into all this in another video.